Welcome to a place where stories aren't just told, they are felt. Here, every word carries the heartbeat of love, every pause hides unspoken desire, and every ending leaves you breathless for more. Step into the world where a stolen glance can spark a fire, where silence breaks into raw confessions, and where passion shatters every boundary. These are not ordinary stories. They are journeys of longing, devotion, and the kind of true love that transforms lives forever. Told in a voice that speaks straight to the soul, you'll find yourself lost in moments of desire, wrapped in the warmth of trust, and carried into the unforgettable depth of love that knows no limits. If you've ever believed in love that begins as forbidden and blossoms into something eternal, you're in the right place. Let's begin this journey together. Every day felt ordinary on the surface, yet something inside those walls was far from ordinary. The office carried the usual rhythm, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, conversations wrapped in polite tones. But underneath the mundane, there was a quiet storm building. A glance that lingered a moment too long, a smile that carried warmth not meant for boardrooms, a voice that softened whenever it crossed a certain space. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious, but it was undeniable. What started as admiration was harmless in the beginning. A strong presence commanded respect, and that respect turned into something deeper without warning. Watching how confidence filled a room, how words could calm tension or spark energy, left a mark that couldn't be shaken. It wasn't about position or authority. It was about something raw and magnetic, something that pulled like gravity. The heart began to beat differently in those quiet encounters, and the weight of it was carried silently, carefully hidden behind steady eyes and measured breaths. Every exchange felt like walking on a thin line. A simple conversation about work carried undertones no one else could sense. Each word hung in the air, brushing too close to secrets neither dared to speak. When a hand accidentally touched while passing papers, the contact burned like fire yet had to be disguised as nothing. The world around remained oblivious, but inside, everything was shifting. There was a moment, small, fleeting, that changed everything. Standing close while going over details on a screen, the scent, the warmth, the nearness made the air heavy. It lasted only seconds, but it left a trace that lingered long after. That night, thoughts refused to quiet. Restless hours turned into endless questioning. Was it only one heart caught in this? Or were two souls dancing around the same desire? Days passed, and with them, the silent game grew. Glances became longer. Smiles carried secrets, and the silence between words spoke louder than any sentence. Every meeting felt like a stage where nothing could be admitted, yet everything was already known. The unspoken was almost louder than speech itself. The pull was not only physical, though it hummed beneath the skin with every passing moment. It was emotional, too. There was a safety in the way eyes met, a strange comfort in the unacknowledged closeness. Even when nothing was said, the silence felt like a conversation only two could understand. It was as though the heart had found a mirror in the most unexpected place, and the reflection was impossible to look away from. But there was fear of breaking something sacred, fear of stepping into forbidden ground. The rules of the world outside didn't leave much room for what was quietly growing inside. Every part of reason said to keep the distance, yet every beat of the heart said the distance was already gone. The conflict carved deep, wanting to protect the ordinary while craving the extraordinary that lived only in those stolen moments. It grew heavier with time. Avoidance only made the longing sharper. Choosing not to look only heightened the ache when eyes finally met. Even the smallest interaction, an email, a brief greeting in the morning, carried a weight that pressed harder on the chest. It was as if everything normal had become charged with a secret current, and resisting it was like trying to hold back the tide. The truth was in the stillness, in the way silence filled a room when no one else was watching, in the quiet awareness that lingered when the day ended, leaving both standing on opposite sides of an invisible line, knowing the same fire burned on both ends. It wasn't spoken, it wasn't confessed, but it was alive, undeniable, and consuming. Every glance was a promise, every word a confession left unspoken. And though the line remained unbroken, the pull kept growing stronger, making it clear that the silence would not last forever. Because some desires are not chosen, they are simply lived. Like breath, like heartbeat, like fate itself, the silence had been stretching for too long. And with each passing day it grew heavier, pressing down like a weight that refused to be ignored. Every shared glance, every word that lingered between us, every moment when the air thickened with everything left unsaid, it all built to a point where holding it back felt like suffocating. The heart can only carry so much in silence before it spills over, and that moment came when the walls of the office could no longer contain what burned inside. It wasn't planned. There was no rehearsal, no careful choice of words. It began in a pause, in the quiet after a long conversation that had nothing to do with feelings. The work was finished, the door was closed, and there was no one else around. For a moment, the world outside stopped existing. Eyes met, and the truth that had been hidden for so long rose up, too strong to push down again. The heart raced so violently, it seemed impossible not to hear it echo in the silence. The words came out fragile, trembling between fear and relief. They weren't grand declarations or carefully chosen phrases. They were raw, clumsy, but honest. A confession that everything seen in the glances, everything felt in the closeness, was not imagined. That the longing had been real, powerful, impossible to deny. For a moment after, time froze. The silence that followed was louder than anything, and fear tightened its grip. What if it was too much? What if it was not returned? But then there was a shift, a softening in the eyes, a breath drawn deeper, a look that held both relief and hunger. The answer didn't need words. It was already there, glowing in the closeness that suddenly felt like fire breaking free from years of restraint. That was when everything changed. Barriers that had seemed impossible to cross dissolved in an instant. The space between was gone, replaced by a nearness that felt both terrifying and right. The truth that had lived in silence was now alive, undeniable, and it filled every heartbeat with a new kind of rhythm. It wasn't just about desire, though desire was fierce and consuming. It was about the risk taken in that moment, the courage to speak what had been buried beneath layers of caution. It was about finally being seen, truly seen, and realizing that the same longing had been alive on both sides. The raw honesty of it shook everything, turned fear into fire, uncertainty into connection. In that private moment, the world outside disappeared. There were no rules, no judgments, no expectations. There were only two souls admitting the truth they could no longer hide. The room itself seemed to change, filled with a charge that made every movement, every breath, feel sacred. The fear didn't vanish completely. It was still there, whispering about consequences and risks. But it was drowned out by something louder, stronger. Every heartbeat said the same thing. This is real. This is alive. This cannot be ignored. It was as though the silence had built a dam, and now that it had broken, nothing could hold back the flood. There was a trembling in that honesty, but also a strength. The courage to speak had opened a door that could never be closed again. What had once been glances and unspoken words was now a bond sealed by truth, and it carried with it a depth that went far beyond desire. Every word after that confession felt different, charged with a new meaning. Every look carried a fire that was no longer hidden. There was no need for pretense anymore. The truth had been spoken, and with it came a freedom that had never existed before. The closeness grew deeper, more powerful, rooted in something that could not be broken by fear. In the quiet of that room, with only walls to witness, two hearts finally admitted what they had known all along. And though the world outside remained unchanged inside, everything was transformed. Because once truth is spoken, it cannot be taken back. It becomes a flame that lights everything it touches. There comes a moment when holding back becomes impossible, when the silence, the waiting, the restraint built over time finally crumbles under the weight of everything unspoken. That moment came with such force it felt like the world itself shifted. What had been carefully hidden behind glances and measured words broke free, raw and unstoppable. It wasn't planned, it wasn't thought through. It was pure surrender, and once it began, there was no turning back. The nearness was different this time. Every inch closer carried a charge that made the air heavy, impossible to breathe. Eyes met, and in them was every confession, every longing, every silent promise that had been carried for so long. One touch, hesitant at first, became a fire that spread too quickly to control. Hands that had once brushed by accident now clung with certainty, pulling, holding, refusing to let go. Every barrier built by fear collapsed, leaving only a need so fierce it drowned out the world. The first kiss was like falling into something vast, a depth that had been waiting quietly for release. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, consuming, as if years of silence demanded to be made up for in a single moment. The heart pounded so violently it felt like it would burst. Yet in that rhythm there was a strange calm, the knowing that this was exactly where it was meant to be. The fire of it went beyond lips and skin. It reached somewhere deeper, touching places words had never been able to reach. Every breath grew heavier, every touch more certain. What had once been restrained by circumstance was now wild, unchained, and there was no stopping it. The passion that took over wasn't just desire. It was recognition, a binding of something greater. Every movement carried meaning. Every closeness carried a truth. This was not temporary, not fleeting, but something eternal burning through the body into the soul. Time disappeared. The outside world no longer existed. Only the rhythm of two hearts finding each other. Only the fire that refused to be dimmed. The intensity went beyond anything imagined. It wasn't just the heat of the moment. It was the weight of everything unspoken finally being lived. It was as though the universe itself paused to witness the breaking of restraint, the merging of two lives into something unexplainable yet undeniable. In that union, there was no shame, no hesitation. There was only truth, written not in words but in closeness, in the way every touch spoke of longing, in the way every kiss sealed promises that would never be broken. The passion carried both fierceness and tenderness, a balance that revealed what it truly was, not just fire of the body, but of the soul. The bond deepened with every heartbeat. It wasn't just about desire satisfied. It was about two people finding the missing part of themselves in one another. Every embrace felt like coming home. Every breath against the skin felt like a vow. The closeness went far beyond flesh. It was a binding, a claiming, a surrender that didn't weaken, but instead made everything stronger. The intensity of it left no doubt. This was not a passing moment, not something that would fade when the night ended. It was unforgettable, etched into every fiber, written into memory as something that could never be erased. The connection was too deep, too powerful, too consuming to ever be undone. When restraint broke, love revealed itself in its truest form. And from that moment, nothing could ever be the same again. What began as a fire that felt dangerous, a pull that seemed forbidden, slowly softened into something deeper, something that reached far beyond desire. At first, it had been about glances that burned, words that carried secret weight, touches that lingered longer than they should. The attraction was undeniable, consuming, and yet it carried a shadow of fear. Fear of being seen, of being discovered, of falling too far into something that had no clear place in the world outside. But as time passed, as moments unfolded one after another, the fire did not fade. Instead, it grew steadier, warmer, reshaping itself into something that felt like the very essence of life. The passion had broken boundaries. That much was true, but it didn't stop there. Passion is fire, but fire alone can destroy. What grew after was more enduring, a devotion that anchored itself in quiet moments as much as in consuming ones. There were mornings that carried simplicity, coffee shared in silence, a hand brushing against another, a smile exchanged without the need for words. It was in these small, almost unnoticeable fragments of time that something greater began to take shape. Desire had been the spark, but trust became the foundation. Trust that went beyond secrecy, beyond fear of what might happen if the world knew. It was the trust of opening wounds, sharing truths that had never been spoken aloud. Stories of past heartbreaks, of struggles faced in silence, of dreams tucked away and forgotten. These became threads weaving something far stronger than simple attraction. With each confession, with each moment of being truly seen, the bond grew tighter, unbreakable. The devotion that followed was not loud. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was about consistency, about being there even in the quiet, ordinary hours. A message that arrived just when it was needed most, a steady presence in moments of doubt, an unspoken promise that said, "You are not alone anymore." What had once been a fire of secrecy turned into a steady flame, one that lit every corner of life with warmth. There was a night when it became undeniable. Lying close, with hearts beating in rhythm, there was no rush, no urgency, only peace. In that stillness, the realization came that this was no longer just passion. This was love in its truest form, a love that held, that healed, that changed everything it touched. The fear of what had once seemed forbidden no longer mattered, because what was found was far too powerful to be broken by doubt. Even challenges could not shake it. There were days of distance, days of uncertainty, days when the outside world pressed too hard against the fragile walls of this love. But each trial only carved the bond deeper. Every storm weathered together became proof that what existed here was not fleeting. It was not a desire that would vanish with time, but a devotion that grew stronger because of what it endured. The connection went beyond passion, beyond even trust. It became a merging of lives, of souls. There was a sense of belonging that no one else could offer, a feeling of being understood without explanation, of being accepted without condition. It was the kind of love that softened every edge, that turned loneliness into companionship, that made every burden lighter simply by being shared. Looking back, it seemed impossible that it had all begun with something that felt so forbidden. And yet, perhaps that was the beauty of it, the way something once feared became the greatest truth of all. Because love is not always born in perfect places, but when it is real, it transforms everything it touches. What began as attraction grew into passion. What began as passion deepened into trust, and what began as trust became love, true life-altering love. A love that could no longer be hidden, a love that would never be forgotten, a love that changed everything forever. Thank you for sharing this moment of love, desire, and truth. If this story touched your heart, there are many more waiting to be discovered, each one more powerful, more unforgettable than the last. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who still believes in true love, and subscribe so you never miss another story that speaks to the soul. Your support keeps these stories alive, and together, we'll continue exploring the depths of love that changes everything. Until next time, keep believing, because love is always worth it.